This is really amazing to be able to virtually see everyone. Lucky me, it's my second time today. We started our virtual roadshow, which I hope you all heard about, where each trip leader is going to be having one of these Zoom meetings with just your city. So please check your email for that. So I had my first one today. It was fantastic to see everybody from Pittsburgh and from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and South Jersey. That's where I'm from. So that was really cool. So I want to tell you a quote that I said to them this morning, which I think is really pertinent for this time of year. A quote that you all know, not a Jewish quote. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And there's another quote that sort of dovetails really nicely with that, which is assimilation is living someone else's memories. How do these two go together? Well, it's one thing to remember history. It's something else to remember your history. The Jewish people, this isn't the hardest thing we've ever been through, this corona isolation thing that we're going through. It's not the hardest, that's not the first difficult time we've been through. And it's certainly not the most difficult thing we've ever been through. We're not strangers to turbulent times. And remembering how we deal with this in our history will help prepare us to be resilient in this moment also. Finding faithfulness in the good times is sometimes a little slippery because when everything's going really well, there's a human tendency to sort of, break our arm, patting ourselves on the back. There was an analogy one of my rabbis said in a class I was watching earlier this week. He said, imagine there's a guy on top of the Empire State Building and he wants everybody to look up and see that he's there. So he starts throwing dollar bills off the Empire State Building. Everyone starts seeing money on the floor. They start looking at the floor to find the money. Nobody looked up. Okay, so he starts throwing down 20s. Well, to pick up the 20s, you need to look at the ground. So you look even more at the ground. So he started throwing down hundreds. Now their eyes are glued to the ground, picking up the hundreds. So he started throwing pebbles. Everybody looked up. We are sometimes in the moments in our lives where things are going really, really well. We may throw off a thank God. I'm only talking to myself here. This is human tendency across the board. And I don't think anyone is inoculated against this tendency. When things are going really well, we could have a tendency to really look at our own talents and skills that did get us to that place. Do we really look up? When things get tough, Judaism also tells us that is also a time to look up. And that could be a little tricky. How do you have faithfulness in a time that isn't so comfortable? How do you find God in something that is painful? So right now in our Jewish history, right, living our own memories, where are we on the calendar? We're about a week before Pesach. So what's really interesting about Pesach and what we're going through now are the similarities. So right now, right, some 3,500 years ago, a little less, when we were sitting in Egypt, so we were preparing for the Exodus. The plague of darkness had just happened a couple weeks ago, and we're about to head into the last of the 10 plagues, the plague of the firstborn. And in order to prepare for the plague of the firstborn, we were told several things we had to do, but the main characteristic that really differentiated the plague of the firstborn was that we were not going to be protected from the plague if we were out on the street. See, with all the other plagues, the Medrash tells us that the Jews were not affected by the first 8 plagues for sure. It says, like famously with the plague of blood, it said that if a Jew was drinking from a glass of water, and his Egyptian taskmaster came over to say, oh, you have water, I need water, to take the water and took a drink, it would turn to blood for him. So there's this concept of the Jewish people were protected regardless of where we were, what we were, how we were Teflon, we were safe. Not so with the plague of the firstborn, which was happening like next week, right now. The plague of the firstborn, we were told, you need to stay in your homes. You cannot leave. There is a plague raging outside, and if you step outside your home, you're not safe. You need to stay inside with just your family, keep the door closed. Sound familiar? when we know Jewish history and we see the cycles coming back around, we are connected to something that's happened years before. What are we supposed to get out of this? How do we see God in this? How do we be able to lean forward? So there's something that I read that is not a Jewish concept, but it is a Jewish concept. I think I've spoken to some of you about this before, the concept of fragile. So fragile, we all know, means something that is easily breakable when you treat it roughly. Let's say something that's fragile is a crystal vase. How many of us have held a crystal vase and it was fine and nothing happened, right? A crystal vase, because it's fragile, doesn't mean it's going to spontaneously explode. It means if I treat it roughly, if I drop it, if I bang it too hard, or if I bang it on the table too hard, then it will crack, then it will break. So fragile means something that breaks easily when you handle it roughly. When I ask people what's the opposite of fragile, they often say sturdy or strong or resilient. But that's not actually true. If you think of something that's sturdy, let's say a boulder is strong and sturdy. If I would take that boulder up to the top of the Empire State Building and drop it, what would happen to that boulder? It's breaking when it hits the ground. If you treat something sturdy roughly enough, it will also break. So sturdy is not the opposite of fragile. It's just a different place on the number line. The opposite of fragile, a professor whose last name is Taleb, T-A-L-E-B, you can look it up after the class, he made up a word and wrote a book about it. And he called it anti-fragile. And he said the resilient resists shock and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. And he speaks about all these different examples in the natural world of things that are anti-fragile. Your muscles are anti-fragile. When you lift weights, your muscle fibers rip, but you stress the muscles. And then when they knit back together, they're stronger for the stress that they went through. Muscles are so anti-fragile that if someone, God forbid, is bedridden in a coma, God forbid, or whatever, we will move their muscles for them, because if you leave the anti-fragile alone, it atrophies. Your bones are anti-fragile. The environment is anti-fragile. A forest fire, it actually makes the environment better. A vaccination, I think it's on all our minds right now. The way it builds your immune system is it introduces the virus into the system. The virus automatically gets stronger and fights against it. And that's how you become inoculated against something, right? We need that now. The Jewish people is also anti-fragile. You are anti-fragile. When we go through something difficult, when we go through something rough, we end up getting better. And we know this when we look out. You know, like nobody wants to watch the movie of the guy who tried, succeeded, and lived happily ever after. You know, that's a boring movie. No one, that movie's not making any money. The movies that are going to make the money are the people, the heroes that fight until they're like almost dead. You know, they're bloody and sweaty and dirty, and and at the end of the movie, the series, you know, 7 movies, 8 movies, you want to see that hero not give up and persist and get stronger. We don't always want to live that. We want to live that I tried, I succeeded, I lived happily ever after. But we know that doesn't grab us. You know, perfection doesn't interest us. It either alienates us, or it intimidates us, or it bores us. But it doesn't resonate because we don't relate to it. It's just not a natural human experience, perfection. I tried, I succeeded, I did everything. We know that failure makes us stronger. We just have to remember it when we're going through something difficult, that this will make us stronger. There's a Jewish idea, a famous saying, that tzaddik falls 7 times, but he gets up. Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kam. The righteous person, that tzaddik, falls 7 times, v'kam, and he gets up. And people usually understand that to mean that the righteous person who made a mistake, everybody makes mistakes. 7 does not just mean 7, you know, 1, 2, 3, that's not what 7 means. 7 is a code. 7 means the natural order of things, like 7 days in a week. 7 means the natural order of things is that righteous people also fail. They're not perfect. A saint is not a Jewish idea. It could be fine for other religions. It's just not Jewish. Somebody once said, if God didn't write the Torah, an anti-Semite did, because all it talks about are all the mistakes that our ancestors made. because that's life on planet Earth, is we fail. So the Torah teaches us our history by showing us the failures, the mistakes that our greatest heroes of our nation made. And that's our spiritual DNA. It's okay to fail. Everybody always thinks that first, the righteous person falls 7 times, but he gets up. They think that means he falls, but he gets up. That's what made him righteous, the fact that he got up. But Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, who was a very famous rabbi in the 20th century, he said something incredible. He said, only fools believe that. Only fools believe that the righteous person is righteous because he got up. He said, the knowledgeable among us knows the righteous person is righteous because he fell. Yes, you have to get up, but the righteous person is not righteous despite his falls. He's righteous because of his falls. Because when we look back on our lives, some of the hardest times we went through, I've been through stuff, you've been through stuff. We've all been through hard times. And sometimes when we look back at those hardest times that were so painful, we realize that made me into something I wouldn't have been otherwise. Like, I am who I am because I went through that. And yes, you have to get up. It's almost like the greatness is planted when you fall, and then it like sprouts when you get up. But if you wouldn't have fallen, it wouldn't have been planted. There's a famous saying, they tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. When difficult things happen to us, that's when we start to blossom. When we're going through it is the time that we need to remember that. The whole reason why the Jewish people went down to Egypt was because of a prophecy that was made to Abraham hundreds of years before. Abraham found God. He was 75 years old when we first meet him in the Torah. He was the first monotheist, the founding father of the Jewish dynasty. And he finds God. And when he's 75 years old, God finally talks to him for the first time. He was like this lone monotheist in the world. That's why he's called Ha-Ivri. Ivri, like Ivrit, like Hebrew. Ivri means Aver, because Abraham can make Aver Hayarden, the other side of the Jordan River. But Aver Hayarden also means he stood alone over there, separate from everyone else. And he found God. And he says to God, how will my children have a relationship with you? I don't want this just be me. I want my children to have this. And the whole future of the Jewish people going into Egypt is revealed in that moment. Because if you want to be a world leader, you cannot be born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You need to know what it feels like to go through hard times. There's something about us that becomes richer and deeper and stronger when you can look at someone and you can say, I've been there. That happened to me too. And we see throughout the Torah gives us mitzvahs like, be careful how you treat the orphan, and be careful how you treat the widow and the stranger, and be kind. You know why? Because you were once strangers in a strange land, because you were slaves in Egypt, and you know what that's like. So moving forward, you have to step up with kindness and with tolerance and with seeing the beauty in the world. That's our mandate. That is our holy, sacred trust in the world. And it all came out of going down to Egypt and going through this tough time. Something was planted in us then. And here we are again, thousands of years later, back in our homes, about to celebrate Pesach, about to celebrate Passover. So I want to read to you 2 things that I received. Maybe some of you received this. They're really beautiful. So the first one is called Corona Crisis. And the author says, 2 of our children asked us, what do you think Zadie, grandpa, would have thought of what we're going through right now? What do you think he would have thought of Corona and we have to be home? And what would your grandfather, Zadie, have thought of this? So he said, who is his grandfather? His grandfather was in Europe during World War II. He spent 3 months hiding in a bunker and then 3 months on the run from the Nazis. So the author writes, what might he say if he were here today? And these are all the questions that he would imagine his grandfather, who lived through the Holocaust, running from the Nazis in the woods in the winter, in the summer, and no food and no shelter. These are the questions he imagines his grandfather may have asked him. You're restricted where to go and how many people can congregate, but you can stay at home and be in your own bed. No bunker, no ghetto, no sleeping with animals in a barn. You could go to sleep at night and expect to find yourself and your family in the same place in the morning. You have enough food in your home to survive for a few weeks. You're not rationing a few grains of barley per person per day. You have water, fresh water to drink. You don't need to limit it. You can shower with soap, with hot water. You can have a Shabbos meal with your family, and you can have real challah and chicken soup, real fish. You don't have to imagine it. And you can have more than one slice. And he goes on and on and on. And at the end of it, he says, there's nothing to complain about. All is okay. And I got this from someone who was with someone in the hospital. God willing, everybody should have refuah shlema. The people that I know right now who are with people in the hospital, they're the ones inspiring me. When I call them, they're the ones inspiring me. I call them heartbroken and they're reassuring me. And I hang up with them and I'm like, I want to be anti-fragile like that. I want to be able to go through something and see the good and encourage the people around me, not be self-pitying, to always be able to reach out and to have something positive to say. What are we doing with what we're going through? And here's the second thing I want to read you. It's a conversation between me, so to speak, right? A woman and God. So me, hey God. God says, hello. I say, I'm falling apart. Can you put me back together? And God says, I'd rather not. Why not? Because you're not a puzzle. But what about all the pieces of my life that are falling down onto the ground? Let them stay there for a while. They fell off for a reason. Take some time and decide if you need any of those pieces back. You don't understand, I say. I'm breaking down. And God says, you don't understand. You're breaking through. What you're feeling are just growing pains. You're shedding the things, the people, the systems in your life that are holding you back. You're not falling apart. You're falling into place. Relax. So in all of this storm, I just had, like I said before, a roadshow with, I don't know how many women were on it from South Jersey and Pennsylvania. And we spoke a little bit about this idea about women being in their homes and what that means. And then we broke out into rooms and everybody shared. And then we came back together and everybody talked about what, they spoke about in their own room, their own little breakout room. It was amazing, the similarity, what everybody spoke about, where they're seeing the good and how they're learning about their families. And the other thing that they said was, when this whole Corona thing started, I thought it would be like this for my family. I thought we would bond and I thought we would all do this together. And then I learned, no, that kid wants to be alone. Or no, it's better if we watch the news separately. Or all of these different sort of little pieces of our families that we thought we got. And now that we're all together for a couple of weeks, we realized, I got that totally wrong. And that's okay. The best thing you can do to be anti-fragile is when you blow it, laugh at yourself. As long as you can laugh at yourself, you get into a fight with your husband or your kids or whatever, you don't call somebody who's mad at you, I don't know. Whatever it is that we do wrong, as long as you can laugh at yourself, you're anti-fragile. You're resilient. You'll be stronger for it. The worst thing is when we make a mistake and we start beating ourselves up about it. That's the worst. There's something in us that it's sort of like our spiritual obstacle to becoming great. And it's this voice of doubt, that's self-doubt. As long as you can laugh and be like, oh my God, did I blow it today? You're fine. You're anti-fragile. And we spoke about that. If we laugh at our mistakes, we're stronger for them. Don't take your mistakes so seriously. There's nothing wrong with failing. You're anti-fragile. You'll just get better. So I think I see in the chat there's some questions coming up. I would love to go to some questions. I think Adrian's going to come back on and help make that happen. And there she is, the gorgeous Adrian.
Oh, Nili, sweetheart, that was so beautiful. You know that story that you read about being a puzzle piece? I just saw that this morning.
Oh, me, oh, there you go. See,
Yeah,
it's great.
Aside from its depth and its beauty, and we will share it with the participants because they're all asking for it. Actually, both of your stories we'll share. It also reminds me, I saw another one this morning, just because I think we're all feeling so intense right now. Perhaps you saw this too, Nili. I've decided to move my mezuzah from my front door to my refrigerator door because that's the only door I keep opening and closing.
Yes.
That's the way to laugh at ourselves.
Yeah, I also saw one today that gave me the giggles. It said 30 days have November, April, June, and September, except March, which has 8,000.
I saw that too. Honestly, this is the only way. What you said at the end when you talked about laughing our way through it, I mean, obviously there are times where there is no laughter available, right? And, you know, nobody should impose their laughter on somebody else, but it works for me. So let me give you some of the questions.
Sure.
And there's a lot of them. So let's start. How do you deal with family members who you're quarantined with who may not have the same kind of faithfulness that you do?
Right. So, I mean, this is, I think, everybody's universal experience right now. You know, they're more faithful, they're less faithful. They believe, they don't believe. Like, part of being in our homes is we are put into a confined space, however big your home is, it's confined at some point with people who see differently than us, more to the right, more to the left, more up, more down, whatever it is. So they're feeling that about you too, number one, like a little humility here, you know, like they're feeling that about you.
Right.
You know, we all talk about being open-minded and tolerant. It's just our, you know, like, it's just my brother I have a problem with. It's just my sister. It's just that kid. You know, we're very tolerant of people we've never met, who we'll never meet. We're very tolerant of them. It's just the people in our lives that sometimes give us a run for the money. Well, your tolerance is really put to the test when you're with the people in, why do you think they're in your life? I mean, that's the Jewish view. Right. Why do you think God put them in our lives? It's because we can grow from that. Let them be. They don't have to be like us. You know, they have to have permission to be different, just like we want permission to be different. You know, let it be.
Beautiful. Okay, the next question. How do we explain this concept of our history to our children? Because we have been through, you know, tremendous things that can show us what it means to be anti-fragile. But for them, this may be the very first time. So what part of our history would you suggest that we begin with to help them build that muscle?
I mean, I would say Passover. You know, it's coming up. It's like God's given us a lob. It could not get easier. If you just, and the Torah, in the beginning, there's 5 books of the Torah. The first is the book of Genesis. That's sort of like the micro story of the family that began the Jewish people. Right. So it's all stories, the whole book. It just reads like a story because it is. And then the first half of the book of Exodus is really pertinent now because that tells the story of Egypt. We suddenly go from micro to macro, but we're still hearing about Moses and Aaron and Miriam, you know, these 3 siblings that are put like sort of in the front seat of the Jewish journey out of Egypt. So Pesach is coming up. Everybody is going to have this opportunity to sit at a Seder. Just open, you know, they call some people the book because you wrote it all down. You can go to, there's many websites you can go to that have fantastic articles, things for kids, things for teens. Use the Passover experience, the Egypt story, to teach this anti-fragile. That's, you know, I don't know if it's the first anti-fragile story in Jewish history. If you look at Genesis, you see Abraham is already 10 tests, anti-fragile to the max. But Pesach coming up, that's the first time the Jewish people as a unit goes through something that shows us how anti-fragile we are.
It's beautiful. It's exquisite. Thank you. Okay. How are we faithful when we're not certain of our faith in God? Is faithfulness just about belief in God?
I think faithfulness is a broad word.
Okay.
As a Jewish value, of course, there's many values that we want to believe in. And Judaism speaks about this, gods. Let me talk about that for a second. My husband's a rabbi, lived in Israel. He died about 10 years ago, I think already. And he would meet all kinds of backpackers. And remember when you could go places? There's backpackers and travelers and all these people. And he said, someone came up to him, a student came up to him and said, Rabbi, I'm an atheist. I don't know, he thought the rabbi would fall apart or something. Rabbi's like, no problem, no problem. He said, do me a favor. Tell me about the God you don't believe in.
Huh.
So the student goes on to explain all the things he thinks God is. He doesn't believe in God. And my husband's rabbi said, yeah, you know what? I don't believe in that God either. Let me tell you about the Jewish God. And he spoke about how God is our Father who loves us and who's giving. And Judaism talks a lot about God. God is a central Jewish value. If someone doesn't believe in it, like, that's okay. That's okay. But faithfulness in Judaism has a lot to do with believing there's a plan for the universe. And we're all a part of that. There's something we can't see that unites us, that gives us purpose, that gives our lives meaning, that infuses morality in 3D, real time, that makes our choices matter.
A power greater than ourselves.
Yeah. And that's a central value that really has inspired the Jewish people for thousands of years.
It's an excellent answer. Okay. What can I do to learn the lesson from my struggles so that the same struggle doesn't happen over and over again?
Wow, somebody's seeing a pattern, right?
Exactly.
Been there, done it, resonates with me. Yeah, there's a concept in Judaism that our souls are here for a reason, and each soul has an IEP, an individualized educational plan, and we are here to learn something specific. And the best way to move through that obstacle, that spiritual obstacle course, is to master it. So we already get that lessons, but you know what? That's okay. It's not a race. You're not racing with anybody else. My mother used to say, God, only sends signs to people who believe in signs. You're not going to get a postcard. You're going to get a sign. So it sounds like your attitude is exactly the way it should be. I'm being taught a lesson. How do I move on to the next lesson? By learning the lesson, by mastering it. But you know what? If it takes you 20 tries, that's okay. There's no timer. You don't get extra points for, speed. Just move through it. Be real. You're not fooling anybody by pretending you learned a lesson you didn't really learn. So God's patient, be patient with yourself.